Hey YouTube, welcome back to the second time lucky mining channel. Today we're gonna have a look at the AMD RX 6800 and then compare the 6800 with its bigger brother, the 6800 XT, the RTX A4000, and then some cards that I don't have at the moment, which is the 3070 and more specifically I think the direct competition, which is the 3070 Ti. So we're gonna have a look at how does the AMD graphics card compare with the competition from a mining perspective. Looking at the card physically, this is the big boy right here in front of me. So you can see I've got the power color one, the Red Dragon power color one. So I think it's the bottom of the range from a quality perspective, but it's pretty big. It's pretty cool. You can see how big it is. It takes two 8-pin connectors. So from a mining perspective, you just need to keep a lookout for that around how do you use your splitters. In comparison, what I have here is a 3060 Ti. So you can see here, this is an LHR 3060 Ti. You can see it only has one 8-pin connector. From a size perspective, so if you've got limited space, you can see here that if I put the two cards back to each other, back to back, let me just line them up. You can see there's all this section here at the back, which is further extended on the 6800. Anyway, from a price perspective, I managed to pick up the 6800 on a special at one of the local retailers here in Australia. I paid 1,500 Australian dollars. I think direct translation to the exchange rate now in US dollar terms, it's about just under 1,100 USD, so 1,080 USD. What we're gonna have a look at today is obviously the hash rates, what overclocks am I using, and then my thoughts around, should you be buying this, what is it good for, and then how does it compare directly with its competition. Anyway, so let me just jump straight into it. So let me show you where I'm going to go and install this 6800. Alright, so here we are at the mining rig. So here you can see the power color 6800. Here's the rig. I've got a spot specifically for it here next to the 6800 XT, one of the 6800 XTs. This is another one. So this is the Red Devil and this is the Red Dragon. So the 6800 will go in here next to its bigger brother. That is a 2070 that I've got in here, and there's the A4000 that I've got there. If you've been following the channel closely, you would notice that I've added two fans. So this is a 120mm fan and there's a 140. So I'm really struggling in summer to keep the A4000 nice and cool. So I'm still waiting for more fans to make it pretty and cool at the end of the day. But anyway, let me go and install. Alright, managed to install it. So you can see it slotted in right there. So let's jump in Hive OS and talk about Overclock's performance, and then the conclusion and thoughts around should you be getting one of these. Okay, so before I jump into overclocks and hash rates in Hive OS, I generally like to look at Tech Power Up just to get a good overview of the graphics card, and then look at a couple of key things for the graphics card, and I will quickly take you through some of those things that I look out for. The first thing that I look for here is the memory. So I can see here the 6800 has got 16 gigs of RAM, which is more than enough from a gaming perspective, and then obviously from a mining perspective. The memory type is also important. So I can see here it's currently using GDDR6, and then the bus width is very important. So the bigger the bus, generally the better. Some of the other things that I look out for here is obviously what is MSRP. So I can see here the MSRP is about 580 US dollars, which is a lie at this point in time. So I don't know where you can get this card at that price. Maybe if you buy it directly from AMD's website, you can get that price. The next thing that I like to look at is the relative performance. So this is sort of a gaming perspective. So how much frames do we get on average? So we can see here the 6800 slots in between the 6800 XT and a 3070 Ti. So it's a little bit better than a 3070 Ti from a rasterization or from an FPS perspective, but a little bit worse than a 3080 or a 6800 XT. That is important to sort of gauge the resale value and what are you paying for the card, or relatively how much more or less are you paying comparatively with another card. So that's what I tend to use this for. Something to take note though is that this relative performance doesn't really take into account. So, you know, being a gamer myself, you know, people like to game on Nvidia cards. Generally speaking, this is a generalization more than AMD cards. And the reason for that is there's a couple of things. There's a couple of features that is on Nvidia cards that's just not at this point in time on AMD cards. So for example, something like DLSS and the ray tracing performance is just not there from a AMD perspective. So AMD can ray trace, for example, but not as good as what Nvidia does. And then there is FSR available for AMD and also for Nvidia cards for that matter, but the DLSS performance or the quality of the images are just better if you look at the comparison perspective. So, you know, gamers tend to pay more for those extra features in my case. Here is the clock speeds and the memory speeds. So I quite like to have a look at that. Also, specifically in this case, I'm looking at the GPU die. So I can see it's a Navi 21 die. So that means it's exactly the same as a 6800 XT. So it's just a cut down version of the 6800 XT. So that'll come into effect as soon as you start looking at my overclocks. So some of the overclocks is very similar between, or at least what I'm doing between the 6800 XT and the 6800. So something else that I like to do is then, you know, in Tech Power Up is then compare the card that I'm considering buying with its competitors or closest rivals, just to get an idea around, you know, should I be buying which card in the end of the day. So in this case, you know, I'd like to compare the 6800 with the RX 6800 XT and then the 3070 Ti. So if I just look at the 6800 XT, if I just open it up, I can see here it's got the exact same memory. It's even got this, so it's got 16 gigs of RAM, it's got the same memory type, so GDDR6, and it's got the same bus width. However, the 6800 XT has got more cores enabled. So you would see from a mining perspective, it will perform very similar. And this is why I mentioned earlier, the 6800 is just a cut down version of the 6800 XT. However, the 6800 XT, if I scroll a little bit down, obviously it's got a higher MSRP, but you would see the TDP is slightly higher. So it's not a 250 watt card, it's an actual 300 watt card. But if you look at the memory clocks, you know, it would be the same as the 6800. And when we come to memory overclocking later, you will see that into full effect. So if I look at the 3070 Ti from a stats perspective or specs perspective, you would see it's got actually a half the RAM. So it's only got 8 gigs of RAM compared to the 16 of the 6800. However, it's got faster memory. So it's got the GDDR6X memory. And it's got the same bus width. So both of the two cards has got 256-bit bus. So theoretically speaking, the 3070 would be able to get more throughput through from a mining perspective because it utilizes faster memory with the same bus width. So it should do better. Unfortunately, from an Ethereum perspective, Nvidia has slotted the LHR nerf on these 3070 Ti. So from an Ethereum perspective, they do slightly worse. However, when I start comparing the hash rates of all the other algorithms, you would typically see that the 6800 does worse compared to the 3070 Ti if you look at Ravencoin or some of the other algorithms. You should also note of is the TDP of the 3070 Ti. So you can see here if I scroll down, it's got a 290 watt TDP. We will obviously clock that down so you won't use 290 watts, but it's always good to know what the design or board design TDP is for the graphics card. For in case if your overclocks got reset for some sort of reason, it will default to this. So when you calculate safety from a wattage perspective, from a power supply, so you should be taking these numbers into account just to be safe. Okay, enough of the boring specs. Let's jump into HiveOS and start looking at the performance. Okay, so this is for me in HiveOS. So you can see here for my flight sheet, I'm mining Ethereum using 2 miners, using Phoenix miners. So unfortunately, for me, the best miner, and if you have a look at the best miner video, you will notice that Team Black Miner for me performs the best. So I get the most hashes out of that. Unfortunately, as soon as I start mixing AMD and NVIDIA cards together, that just bombs out. So Phoenix Miner has been very stable for me. So you can have a look at throughout today how stable Phoenix Miner is. So these little gaps that you would see here, this is sort of when I started fiddling with the rig to shoot the video for you guys. So that's the gaps that you see there. It's been hell of a stable, specifically for me. Okay, so let's look at the overclocks. So if I just jump in here, I've got the core locked at 1250, the core voltage at 620, and then I've got the memory at 1050. So I don't have anything else. I've got the fan on auto as well. So I consider these stable overclocks, and then stable overclocks in my current environment. So what do I mean by that? You know, where I am in the world, it is in the peak of summer and it's hell of a hot outside. So you know, for perspective, I think today it was 37.5 degrees Celsius outside. So for the American friends, that would be about 99 Fahrenheit. So it's a hell of a hot outside. And if you had a look at the earlier video, I don't have a external fan on the frame blowing directly on the 6800 at this point in time. So I'm still waiting for the fan to come and help it out a little bit. So I only have it for my problem child, who's this RTX A4000 at this point in time. So as you can see here, using my overclocks here, which I consider stable and then stable in a hot environment, is 61.6 at around 120 watts. But if you compare it with the 6800 XTs, and again, from an overclock perspective, the 6800 and the 6800 XT should perform more or less the same. The only reason why I don't have the memory clocked at 1075 for the 6800 again is because the memory temperature here is about 70 at the moment. So I don't really want to push it too hard in the hot environment. So that's really why. But I can apply those overclocks. So if I'm being more aggressive and it's a cooler day outside, what I would generally do is the following. So if I just go here, change this to 75. Whoops, not like that, like this. And the other thing that I would do is, what I've noticed, my card specifically likes a core clock of 1300 at 1075 on the memory. That sort of gives it the biggest hashes. So if I just refresh and give it a couple of seconds, you would see it should shoot up to about 63 or close to 64. So let's just give it a second. Now that I've given it a second, you can see here with the core at 1300 and the memory at 1075, it's still on 70 degrees, so that is nice to know. However, the temperature or the wattage has dropped and the hash rate is now kicked up to 63. So you can see here I can get more with this specific clocks, but I specifically tuned down today because it was a hell of a hot outside. So that normally this is what I would have on if it's not a hot day. The other thing, if I just quickly switch my flight sheet to Team Black Miner, you would even see more hashes. So let me quickly do that and show you what that looks like. Okay, so I've switched it to Team Black Miner, and as you can see here on the 6800, I'm very close to getting 65 mega hashes. But as I mentioned, and you can see the power draw is also less. So I really like Team Black Miner for these AMD GPUs, but as I mentioned earlier, the stability together with the NVIDIA cards is just not working for me. So I get an error every now and again on the A4000, specifically using Team Black Miner. So I don't know if there's an issue. I'd like to hear, if you guys get the same sort of issues. But for me, it's just more stable using Phoenix Miner, and stability is sort of king, so the less admin I have to do on the mining rig. Okay, so I've put everything back to what they should be from a stability perspective, or at least for me from a stability perspective. So I'm back on using Phoenix Miner on the 2 miners pool, and as you can see here, the 6800 does about 63 for me, and that is very similar to the 6800 XTs. So for me, from a mining hashing perspective, they perform very similar. The difference, however, and what I've noticed even on hotter days, is the memory temps are considerably higher between the 6800 and the 6800 XT. So I'm not sure, I haven't opened up the card to have a look at the memory cooling, but I can definitely see it's quite a big difference between the 6800 and the 6800 XTs. If you are not using HiveOS, however, and you are using Windows, the overclocks would be something similar to what you would see here in HiveOS, just slightly different. So let me just show you the AMD overclocks that I would use in Windows. So you can see here my gaming PC is obviously a Windows machine. If I opened up the overclocks, the Radeon software here, you would see here I've got a 6800 XT within this rig, but as you would have seen in HiveOS, the overclocks is more or less the same, and you will get the same performance. And this is what I use, at least from my gaming machine perspective. So I would enable or set the minimum frequency as low as it can go, which is 500 in my case, max 1250. And then the voltage, if you're not using something like more power tools, the lowest that the voltage can go is 881. So in HiveOS you can even put it lower, so that is nice. But if you don't want to tweak BIOSes and stuff like that, this is as low as it can go from a Windows perspective. Then I enable VRAM tuning, I then enable fast timings, and then I push it up as high as it can go here. And then similarly on the right hand side for the power tuning, as low as the power slider can go is normally what I put it on there. And again, you should be getting around 62, 63 mega hashes depending on the miner that you use, and then what else is running at that specific point in time on your machine. As I mentioned, if you would like to fiddle even more and get more efficiency out of this, and really to get these voltages down further, and that's the thing that you can't really do within this tool, you can use the more power tools. And for that case, I would recommend going and watching Son of a Tech's video. He does a great video explaining where do you download that software and how do you tweak it and then put that onto your card. So I would advise you to go and watch his video. But from a Windows perspective, as I mentioned, the exact settings that I have here for my 6800 XT should work for the 6800. So now that we know Windows and Linux performance for Ethereum for the 6800 XT, that draws us to the conclusion and the final thoughts around, should you be using this GPU for mining, and should you be buying this GPU? You know, what's my final thoughts on the AMD Radeon RX 6800? For me, this should and can definitely be used for mining, specifically Ethereum. So as you can see here, I get about consistently or stable 63 mega hashes, no problem. And if I push the correct miner and my overclocks a little bit more, I can get close to 65 mega hashes using 120 watts according to the software. So it's really good from that standpoint. But you can't just look at a graphics card in isolation on the numbers, because there's a dozen or loads of other graphics cards that you can buy. So it really depends in your situation. And to answer that a little bit more specifically, or to help people make that decision, I've got a spreadsheet that I can take you guys through, at least to show sort of my thinking around it. So everybody has got a different way of evaluating, you know, should they be buying a specific graphics card for mining. And for me, it's a bit boring, but it's my process, and for me it works. But I like to use Excel and then weigh up pros and cons and look at a couple of key things. And in this video, I'll quickly take you through sort of how I do it and what's important for me. So in this sheet, it's the same sheet that you would have seen in my other videos that I am updating from a benchmark and overclocks perspective. You can see here the 6800. So if I just quickly jump in there, you would find here my stable and efficient overclocks that I'm currently using. But ultimately, for decision making and comparing various GPUs against each other, I'll quickly take you through my process. So whenever I make a buying decision or comparing different GPUs against each other, I like to apply my 3PF process. So that's 3 P's and 1 F. So the first P being price. So that's pretty easy. I would compare the price between the different GPUs or the GPU. The second one would be performance. So that's when I look at the hash rates against certain algorithms between the different GPUs. And I would typically use What2Mine or YouTube for that. The next one would be profitability. So, even though I can hash at X amount of rate, is there a coin that is profitable to mine for that specific GPU at this specific point in time? So I would look at that. And then the last F would be future. So, even though something is profitable at this specific point in time, it might change in the future. And this is where I think the 6800 and the 3070 Ti is a good example, where we know for a fact, from a profitability perspective, the Ethereum profitability on the 6800 at this point is higher than the 3070 Ti, but we know that there will not be a long-term future for proof of work for specifically Ethereum. So these are all of the stuff that will come into the buying decision or comparison between these specific two cards. So if I go and apply the 3PF process now between these two cards, if I look at price, it really depends on your region. So for me, where I am, it's definitely cheaper to have the 6800 compared to the 3070 Ti. If I look at it from a performance perspective, the 3070 Ti gives me access to more algorithms, and it beats the 6800 more in other algorithms as well. Not only does it give me access to more, but it also beats it in more algorithms. Then the next one is profitability, and this is now where it gets interesting. So if you open up What2Mine between a 6800 and a 3070 Ti, and today it's like the 30th of December, the 6800 would be more profitable than the 3070 Ti. And if high on the list for the 6800 would be Ethereum would be on that list. So, where the 3070 Ti would be something like Ravencoin as an example. So, this is now where the profitability, would win on the 6800. And then the next F would be future. Yeah, and in my case, we know that Ethereum doesn't have a long-term proof of work roadmap, if I can put it like that. So, that will fall away at some point in time. So, in my opinion, at least the 3070 Ti allows you to hash more algorithms and future-proof you a little bit more compared to the 6800, at least in my opinion. So, what would I do? If I can get a 3070 Ti that costs more or less the same as a 6800, I would buy the 3070 Ti without a doubt. If the 6800 is way cheaper than the 3070 Ti, I would pick up the 6800. But ideally, I'd like to get both if I can get my hands on them. So that's my conclusion. If I can get a 3070 Ti close to a 6800, I would take that. Otherwise, the 6800 needs to be a little bit cheaper. Alright guys, so there you have it. I'd rather buy the 3070 Ti if I can get my hands on it, and it's a similar price to the 6800. So if you've liked the video, please like it and maybe consider subscribing. If you didn't like it, please specify in the comments what you would like me to change. Otherwise, I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.